I'm Amanda Blake. I'm 36 now, and the morning I stepped into my mother-in-law's kitchen, I saw her beaming over a stack of $100 bills. She looked up from the counter, proud as can be, and said, "I sold that junky car, finally got you something more practical." I smiled just barely, but my hands went cold. Because what she called junk was a fully restored 1967 Shelby Cobra. My father's dream car and my life's work. She had no idea it was worth over $300,000. She had no idea what she'd just done. But I did. And everything changed from that moment on. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had something important taken from you by someone who was supposed to protect it. I was raised in Michigan, just outside of Detroit. My dad, Robert, was a mechanic, one of those guys who could fix a timing issue just by listening to the engine. He handed me my first wrench when I was 7. By 12, I could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. That garage in our backyard was where I grew up. It wasn't just about cars. Dad believed in fixing what was broken no matter how long it took. He used to say, "Mandy, don't walk away from something just because it needs work. That's where the meaning is." I didn't always understand what he meant, not back then, but I never forgot it. He passed away when I was 23. Pancreatic cancer. One minute we were talking about the Cobra poster he'd kept over his workbench since the 80s. The next I was holding his hand in a hospital room, promising him I'd finish what he couldn't. He'd always wanted a Shelby Guardsman blue-white racing stripes 427 engine. That dream became mine the day I buried him. A few years later, I met Jack at a car show in Ann Arbor. He asked smart questions, not the kind that were just meant to flirt. We talked about compression ratios over coffee, and for once I didn't feel like I had to tone down what I loved. Jack was easy to like, calm, charming. We dated for a year, then got married in the fall. That's when I met Patricia. She was polished, opinionated, very proper. She called my restoration work a greasy hobby and asked if I ever planned to settle into a more feminine role. At the time, I laughed it off. I figured she was old-fashioned. I didn't realize then just how far she'd go to prove her point. Jack and I bought a modest 2-bedroom with a double garage, and I turned it into my dream workspace, real ventilation, epoxy floors, industrial lifts. Business picked up steadily. I specialized in classic American builds. My hands were always stained with oil, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Then came the layoffs. Jack's company downsized, and his entire department got cut. Our savings didn't stretch far, especially in the off-season. After a few months, Jack suggested moving in with Patricia just for a little while. She had a big house, plenty of space, and I agreed reluctantly. 2 days before we moved, Mr. Caldwell, an old neighbor, mentioned a barn he was cleaning out. Said there was a busted-up chassis that might be worth something. I drove over that afternoon, and there it was buried under a tarp, half-eaten by rust nests in the engine bay. But I knew that silhouette. It was a 1967 Shelby Cobra, and it was real. I hauled it out the next morning and brought it to Patricia's garage. She took one look and asked if I'd dragged home a tetanus risk. I tried to explain what it was, what it could become. She didn't care, but I did. For the next 18 months, I worked on it piece by piece. Every bolt, every stripe, every stitch in the leather interior was exact. When I finally turned the key and heard that engine roar to life, I swear I could feel Dad beside me smiling. It was more than a car. It was a promise kept, and soon it would become the center of a betrayal I never saw coming. I'd just finished an oil change on a '61 Thunderbird when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. About those extra Cobra parts you mentioned. When can I pick them up? I stared at the screen confused. I hadn't told anyone I was selling parts. I wasn't selling anything. My hands froze still, slick with grease, as I typed back, "You've got the wrong person. I'm not selling anything from that car." The reply came fast. "Just picked it up from your place." Older lady said you'd have extras stored somewhere. Said to text this number. I read it again, then again. Each word hit harder than the last. Older lady, my place, picked up. There was only one person that could mean. I grabbed my jacket and keys and told my boss I had an emergency. He didn't ask questions, just gave me a nod. The drive from the garage to Patricia's house felt longer than ever. Every red light, every slow turn made it worse. I kept trying to make sense of it. Maybe she moved it. Maybe Jack took it out and didn't tell me. Maybe this was a prank. But I knew better. There was a pickup truck in the driveway when I pulled up. Its bed was filled with bins and crates. Some of the bins were open. I could see parts. My parts. Inside the house, Patricia was at the kitchen table, sorting bills into neat little stacks. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Oh, Amanda, you're home early," she said, counting aloud as she straightened a stack of crisp hundreds. 15,000 in cash. Quite a deal for something that wasn't even running properly. I heard the words, but they didn't register. I was standing there, in front of her, and she was talking about the Cobra. My car. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my chest was tightening. "I sold it," she said, like she'd just returned something to the store. That junky thing was taking up space. I figured it was time for something more practical. "Now you've got money to put toward a real car." I blinked. "You sold my car." "The Cobra." She looked up then, smiled. "You're welcome. I even negotiated, started at 10, got him to 15. The buyer was thrilled, said it was exactly what he'd been looking for. I pulled out a chair and sat, slowly, carefully. Every word needed to come out right. That car, I said, was worth $300,000. Patricia laughed. A foolhardy laugh like I'd told her the punchline to a joke. "No old car is worth that. Come on, Amanda, be serious." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. Then I asked, "Did you give him the documentation that was in the trunk? What that dusty binder and those papers?" "Sure, I handed all that over. He seemed interested, said it'd help with the resale." My chest tightened. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the air had left the room. That binder had everything: the photos, the appraisals, the authentication certificate. Even the small compartment I'd hidden in the trunk. It held Dad's old Rolex, the one he'd worn to every car show when I was a kid. All of it, gone. "I need the buyer's name, and the number I said." She raised an eyebrow but handed me a slip of paper. "Roger something. He restores cars, apparently. Said he's been looking for a Cobra for years." I stepped into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor. I wasn't crying. Not yet. I couldn't. I needed to stay clear-headed. After a few minutes, I called the number. He answered on the fourth ring. "Roger speaking. This is Amanda Blake. The car you picked up today, the Shelby Cobra, was sold without my permission. I'm the legal owner." There was a pause. "Look, he said she had the keys, said her son and daughter-in-law were downsizing. I paid cash, got a receipt. I'm not trying to cause trouble here. That car is registered in my name. I have the title. You bought stolen property." Another pause. I already started breaking it down. Pulled the engine out this morning. That alone's worth more than what I paid. Breaking it down, I asked the words catching. "It wasn't worth $300,000, he said, like he was trying to calm a child. If it was, you wouldn't have kept it in a garage next to an SUV. Some old lady wouldn't have sold it for peanuts." He hung up. I stared at the wall, the frame, the body, the parts. Months of my life. Dad's dream. Gone. The front door opened and I heard Jack's voice calling Mom, Amanda. He sounded upbeat. "Good news." I got the job. They called just before I left the office. Then he saw my face, and Patricia at the table, and the cash. "What's going on?" he asked. "I sold the car," Patricia said cheerfully. 15,000. A great deal. Now you can get something sensible." Jack turned to me. "She sold the Cobra. "She sold my Cobra," I said, without telling either of us, to a man who's already ripping it apart. Jack looked stunned. "You said it was valuable, but I didn't realize—" "I showed you the offer from the collector at the show," I said. "The appraisal. The judge's evaluation." Patricia crossed her arms. "You've been exaggerating, making it out like it's some museum piece to justify pouring money into that thing." I pulled out my phone, brought up the photos, the appraisal letter, the collector's offer. Jack stared at the screen. His face went pale. "300, he whispered. "Mom, what did you do?" Patricia's voice changed. "I didn't know. You never told me that. I told you both," I said. Repeatedly. "You should have put it in a museum if it was that special. Not in my garage. I paid you for that garage. Every month." Jack stepped between us. "Mom, you should have asked. This wasn't your decision to make." Patricia stood, her voice rising. "I was helping. I was doing what you wouldn't, standing up and making a smart decision for this household." I didn't answer her. I looked at Jack. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he said, "We can figure this out. Maybe we can get it back. He's already dismantling it." "It's gone, Jack." He reached for me, but I stepped back, and when he said, "It's just a car," I knew we were finished. I turned and walked out the door. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I just drove. And when I pulled into my friend Sophia's driveway that night, I knew something big was coming. Bigger than the car, bigger than Patricia. This wasn't just about what had been taken. It was about what I was finally ready to reclaim. Sophia didn't ask for details when I showed up on her porch that night. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. "Come in. We'll figure it out tomorrow," she said. Her guest room had soft lighting and a twin bed with a blue quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. I sat on the edge for a long time without moving. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock and the sound of my own breath, slow and shallow. I pulled out my phone, opened the gallery, and scrolled through photos of the Cobra, the gleaming body, the leather seats I'd stitched by hand, the restored gauges, the little tribute plaque I'd mounted under the dashboard. None of it looked real anymore. That night, I didn't sleep much. Around 4 a.m, I opened my laptop and started researching. Property law, unauthorized sales, vehicle registration rights. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, just something solid to hold on to. By sunrise, I had a notepad filled with questions and a tightness in my chest that wouldn't ease up. Sophia walked in with coffee around 7. "My cousin Travis specializes in property law," she said, setting the mug down beside me. "I already texted him. He'll meet us before his office opens." Travis looked like the kind of man who kept a flashlight and jumper cables in his car, at all times calm, practical. No nonsense. We met at a corner table in a quiet coffee shop near downtown. He listened as I explained everything from the first day I towed the Cobra into Patricia's garage, to the text from Roger, to the sale, to the conversation at the kitchen table. I laid out every detail I could remember. When I finished, he nodded slowly and reached for his notepad. "You've got a case," he said. "What your mother-in-law did qualifies as unauthorized sale of personal property. Depending on the buyer's knowledge or what he should have known, he could also be liable." I asked what I'd need to prove it. Proof of ownership, of course. Any paperwork showing the car's value, and ideally something showing that she knew she didn't have the right to sell it. I opened my cloud account and pulled up the folder I'd started the night before. Photos from the restoration-dated videos, scanned documents, emails from appraisers, and the offer letter from the collector at the car show. Travis took his time reviewing it. "This is solid," he said. "You've documented the entire restoration process. Most people don't think to do that." I hesitated, then added, "There's a security camera in the garage. It was recording conversations." He looked up. "That could help. especially if it catches anything about ownership or permission. After the meeting, I reached out to the car community forums I'd used during the restoration. I explained the situation, asked for advice, and within hours I had replies. A few offered to testify about the car's rarity. Others shared legal contacts. One message stood out. It was from Marcus Jefferson, the head judge at the show, where the Cobra had taken top honors. He sent a formal statement by email that same day. This vehicle was one of the most authentic restorations I've seen in 20 years. A documented original 1967 Shelby Cobra in this condition is worth upward of $300,000. Its sale for a fraction of that value is a loss not only to the owner, but to the preservation of automotive history. I printed that email and added it to the growing folder in my bag. The next afternoon, I returned to Patricia's house. I knew she wouldn't be home. She had bridge club on Thursdays. Jack's car was in the driveway. He opened the door, still wearing his work shirt. His expression was hard to read, part relief, part guilt. "Amanda," he said, stepping aside, "I'm glad you came." I walked in without answering. We sat at the kitchen table. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Did you know what your mother was planning? Even a hint?" "No," he said quickly. "I swear I had no idea." I studied his face. He looked tired, maybe even honest. "But you've let her cross every other line I said, so why would she think this was any different?" He didn't answer right away. Then he exhaled long and slow. "I didn't think she'd do something like this. She kept telling me you were planning to leave once I found a job, that you were hiding money, that you were only staying here for convenience, and you believed her. I didn't want to argue," he said. "I thought avoiding it would keep the peace." I stood and walked down the hallway toward Patricia's study. The door was unlocked. I knew what I was looking for, though I didn't know if I'd find it. The bottom drawer of her desk held old paperwork envelopes, some utility bills, and a leather-bound notebook tucked under a stack of file folders. I opened it. I hesitated. Then I turned to the last few pages. April 3rd. "That eyesore in the garage needs to go. Jack won't say it, but I know he's tired of it. Found a business card Amanda left on the counter. We'll call tomorrow." April 10th. "Buyer not interested without Amanda present. Says he needs documentation. I'll find another way." April 15th. "Met Roger at the grocery store. Mentioned the Cobra. He asked to come by and take a look." April 28th. "He's picking it up tomorrow while Amanda's at work. Jack has an interview, won't be home. Told Roger $15K as is. Once it's gone, they'll have to move on. Better to ask forgiveness than permission." I snapped photos of each entry and slid the journal back where I found it. When I handed my phone to Jack, his hands trembled slightly. "She planned it," I said, "down to the day and time." His voice was quiet. I didn't know. "But you made it easy for her," I said. "She knew you wouldn't stop her." We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "What do we do?" "I already have Roger's contact," I told him. "He's selling the engine to a buyer in Chicago this weekend. If we're going to recover anything we need to go now." Jack nodded. "Then let's go." The next morning, Travis joined us on the drive. Roger's shop was out near Flint, tucked behind a row of old warehouse buildings. When we walked in, the first thing I saw was the Cobra's hood leaning against a wall streaked with grease. The body was stripped. The interior was piled in a corner. Roger didn't look surprised to see me. "I already told you," he said. "I paid in cash. Had the keys. She said she was the owner." Travis opened his briefcase. "You bought stolen property. Here's the title. Here's the restoration record. Here's proof she didn't have authority to sell it." Roger looked through the papers. His face changed when he saw the appraisal and Marcus Jefferson's letter. "I didn't know he said, finally. She seemed legit. She had details about the car. She even showed me a binder." "You didn't check the title?" Travis asked. "She said her son and daughter-in-law were offloading it to buy something practical." We stood there, the three of us waiting. Roger rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I already started breaking it down, but I haven't sold everything." After 2 tense hours, we came to an agreement. Roger would return every part still in his possession. I would reimburse him for the $15,000 he paid Patricia, plus $2,000 for the trouble. He would provide a written list of anything already sold or damaged. And he handed over the binder and Dad's watch from the compartment in the trunk. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A foothold, a place to begin again. I placed the binder flat on the kitchen table, opened it, and slowly flipped through the pages. Every note, every invoice, every step of the restoration was still there. Some of the corners had curled from moisture and a few pages were smudged from being handled, but it was all intact. And tucked into the back pocket, still wrapped in the cloth I'd folded around it months earlier, was Dad's watch. Jack stood beside me saying nothing. He didn't try to touch it. He just looked at it like he finally understood what had been lost. We met with Travis the next morning in his office. While he reviewed the itemized list Roger had provided, I sat quietly across from him and went over everything in my mind again. The photos, the journal, the offer letter. Each piece had a place. The story was full now, and the pattern was clear. "You've got a strong case," Travis said, glancing up from his notepad. "The question now is, how do you want to proceed?" He went over the options, pressing formal charges, sending a demand for restitution, opening a civil claim. Each route would take time, possibly months, possibly more. "But this wasn't just about money anymore. I want her to understand what she's done," I said. He nodded. "Then we do this properly." Before anything else, I booked an appointment with a therapist. Sophia had recommended Dr. Evelyn Chin. We met at her office just off a quiet side street near the university. She had that kind of voice that didn't rush anything, and she listened without interruption as I laid it all out. She didn't ask about the car at first. She asked about Patricia, about Jack, about the years before this. "Tell me about the little things," she said. "The first times you noticed she crossed the line." I told her about the cooking comments, the tossed-out carburetor tools, the closet she reorganized while I was at work. I told her how Jack always smoothed it over, how I'd learned to let it go. "You've spent years absorbing disrespect quietly," she said. "Now you're being asked to name it, to say, this is what happened and it matters. That's not small." We worked through this plan, what I wanted to say, what I would and wouldn't accept. People who are used to being protected from consequences, she said, often respond with confusion when those consequences finally arrive. Stay steady, state the facts, keep your boundaries firm. 2 days later, we set the meeting. Jack and I returned to the house with Travis. Roger had delivered the recovered Cobra parts to Patricia's garage the day before under Travis's guidance. The hood, the frame, the engine block. The pieces sat in neat rows, now quiet reminders of what had been undone. Patricia came through the back door with her purse looped over one shoulder. She paused when she saw us at the kitchen table. Jack stood. "Mom, we need to talk." Travis kept his voice calm. "Mrs. Blake, I'm Amanda's attorney. We're here to address the sale of the vehicle that occurred without her consent." She frowned. "I already told you I thought I was helping." Travis opened his folder and began laying out documents. "This is a copy of the vehicle title in Amanda's name. This is a notarized appraisal of the vehicle's value. These are statements from expert witnesses confirming that value. And these," he said, sliding over printed journal entries, "are your own notes documenting the plan to sell the car while Amanda was not present." Patricia's mouth tightened. She glanced at Jack. "You went through my personal things. I read your intentions in your handwriting," he said quietly. She folded her arms. "It was just sitting there taking up space. Nobody told me it was some priceless artifact. I told you I said, many times, You chose not to listen. Travis continued. Selling property you don't own is theft under Michigan law. Because the car has now been partially recovered, we are not seeking criminal charges at this time. However, Amanda is entitled to compensation for the loss of value caused by the unauthorized sale and dismantling of the vehicle. Patricia didn't answer. She looked from Travis to Jack, then to me. I don't have that kind of money, she said after a long pause. Travis didn't blink. Your recent mortgage refinance application lists multiple investment accounts in a paid-off property. Based on our valuation of the remaining components we are seeking, $240,000 in restitution. That number reflects the diminished value after the vehicle was disassembled. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping the floor. This is ridiculous. I did what I thought was best for both of you. And now you're punishing me. Jack looked at her steady but tired. You didn't do it for us. You did it because you were tired of the car, and you knew I wouldn't stop you. You'd really do this, she asked, her voice sharp. Side with her, after all I've done for you. This isn't about sides, Jack said. It's about right and wrong. For a while, no one said anything. Then Patricia sat back down. I need time to talk to my own lawyer, she said. I won't sign anything today. That's fine, Travis said. You have 48 hours to respond. After that, we'll proceed through formal channels. As he packed up his documents, I spoke once more. We're moving out, Patricia. Jack and I already have a place lined up. And if there's ever to be a relationship going forward, it'll happen on new terms with boundaries. Clear ones. Her expression flickered. She looked at Jack again. You don't have to do this. You're my son. He didn't look away. And Amanda is my wife. This is long overdue. We left the house not as guests, not as family, but as people no longer willing to be controlled. That night we moved the last of our things into the apartment. It was small and still smelled like new carpet. But it was ours. No comments, no corrections, no walking on eggshells. The next day, Travis called to say her attorney had made an offer, $175,000, plus the return of all car components still in her possession. After consulting with experts, we accepted. It wasn't full restitution, but it was enough to move forward. Jack started his new job the following week. I kept working with clients while slowly sorting through the pieces of the Cobra. The frame had been damaged. Some parts were lost for good, but there was still something there. I didn't know yet what I'd rebuild from it, but I knew I wasn't done. The parts Roger returned arrived a few days later, carefully wrapped, labeled, and stacked in crates. Jack and I cleared out half the garage in the new apartment to make space. It wasn't big, but it was clean, well lit, and quiet. I laid the pieces out on a pair of folding tables and stood over them for a long time. The Cobra's leather seats were intact. The engine block had been removed cleanly, but the frame was bent. The fenders scratched and the dashboard torn where someone had ripped out the gauges. It wasn't just disassembled, it had been wounded. That night over dinner, Jack asked, "Do you think you'll try to restore it again?" I didn't answer right away. The question felt too big to tackle with a plate of pasta in front of us. Instead, I said, I'm not sure yet, but I'm not letting it end like this. We spent the next few weeks settling into a rhythm. Jack's new job had him out of the house by 8 most mornings. I divided my time between repair work for longtime clients and slowly cataloging what could be salvaged from the Cobra. The check from Patricia's settlement arrived just before the first of the month. I had it transferred into a new business account, one that bore only my name. Then I leased a small unit in a quiet industrial park across town. The first time I stepped into that empty space, I brought Dad's watch in my pocket. I didn't wear it. I just held it for a minute, then placed it on the new workbench while I unpacked a box of tools. That was the day Blake Vintage Restorations was born. It started quiet. A friend from the classic car show circuit brought in a 1955 Chevy Bel Air that needed cosmetic work. Another customer came with a '63 Impala tired paint clean engine. I kept the Cobra's recovered engine on display at the back of the shop, mounted on a stand beside a photo of the original restoration. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. Word got around. A month after the shop opened, Marcus Jefferson dropped by. He walked the space, slowly pausing by the Cobra engine, then turned to me. "This place suits you," he said. I was sorry to hear what happened. "Thank you," I said. "I'm trying to build something better out of what's left." He gave a small nod, then glanced back at the engine. "If you ever want a business partner, let me know. You've got the hands and the heart for this work." We stayed in touch after that. He sent referrals, helped review restoration estimates, introduced me to suppliers who specialized in vintage trim and period-correct upholstery. And Jack kept showing up. He brought me coffee in the mornings, helped run parts when I needed an extra set of hands. He'd started seeing a therapist, too. He didn't say much about it, but I noticed the difference. One night, while I was reassembling a vintage dashboard harness, he leaned against the door frame and said I didn't realize how much I used silence to avoid things, even when I knew they weren't right. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. I thought I was keeping the peace, he said, but what I was really doing was making it easier for Mom to push people around. He paused, watching me twist a bundle of wires together. "I'm sorry it took this long to understand that." We didn't talk about forgiveness that night. Some things don't get decided in one conversation. As the shop grew, so did my confidence. I applied for a small grant from a local foundation that supported women-owned businesses. I hosted a workshop on restoration basics. A few high school students came by to interview me for a project on women in trades. I started to feel like myself again, just a version that had lived through something. Then one Saturday afternoon, I was sweeping the floor when I heard a knock on the shop side door. Mr. Caldwell stood there, hat in hand, holding a dusty folder. "Found this while clearing out the last of my brother's things," he said. "Thought it might belong with that old car you hauled off." Inside the folder were the original factory build sheets for the Cobra yellowed, slightly creased but complete. I turned each page carefully. Assembly notes, paint codes, handwritten signatures from the Shelby plant in '67. "These are incredible," I said. He nodded. "Didn't know what they were, but figured you'd appreciate 'em." I locked the folder in the fireproof cabinet that afternoon. They weren't just paperwork. They were proof that something rare and real had passed through my hands, and might again. Meanwhile, Patricia stayed quiet. There were no sudden phone calls, no unannounced visits. Jack saw her occasionally, always in public places, always short and polite. 6 months after the settlement, we agreed to meet her for dinner at a small Italian place near her neighborhood. She arrived on time, dressed neatly, and didn't say anything for the first few minutes, just looked around at the table, fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. Then she said, "I still don't understand why anyone would put that much money into an old car." She didn't say it with contempt, just confusion. And then she added, "But I had no right to sell it. I know that now. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." It was quiet after that. I looked at Jack. He looked at me. I didn't say I forgave her, but I did say thank you. It wasn't the end. But it was the first moment that felt like a beginning. The shop took shape slowly, not in a rush, just one task at a time. A pegboard for the hand tools, a corner shelf for the polishes and compounds, a rolling cart that held my father's wrenches cleaned and sorted exactly the way he used to keep them. By early spring, I had a solid list of clients and enough saved from the settlement and ongoing projects to cover expenses for the rest of the year. But I still hadn't decided what to do with the Cobra's remains. They sat protected and wrapped in the back corner of the unit. Some parts were too damaged to be reused. Others had been lost altogether. The original frame couldn't be aligned properly again, not without major fabrication work. One morning, while I was working on a Corvette's interior trim, Jack came by with lunch. He watched me measure out the dash panels, then asked, "Do you think it'll ever be the same again?" "The Cobra, I mean." I looked over at the crate where the engine block sat. "No," I said. "Not the way it was. But maybe it can become something else." We talked more after that. Not just about the car, but about the months we'd spent in Patricia's house. The patterns we'd lived in. The silences. Jack had been going to therapy weekly. Sometimes he'd bring home handouts. Other times he'd share something his therapist had asked, simple questions that somehow reached deeper than expected. "I used to think conflict was the worst thing that could happen," he told me once. "But I'm learning that avoiding it cost me more in the long run." I didn't respond right away. I just listened. We were learning not to rush through things anymore. By late summer, I decided not to rebuild the Cobra, not in the traditional sense. Instead, I used the fund space and recovered components to build something new, something that could live beyond just one car. I started designing a small mobile exhibit for car shows and auto museums. Not flashy, just clean, clear, and honest. Photos of the restoration process, the appraisal documents, a short write-up on the importance of provenance and documentation in collector vehicles. And at the center of it all, the engine gleaming under soft light mounted upright on a reinforced stand. Above it hung a plaque, "Value Beyond Price, a Restoration Story." The first time I showed it was at a regional heritage event in Grand Rapids. I wasn't sure what kind of reaction it would get, but people stopped. They read. Some asked questions. Some shared their own stories. A man in his 60s leaned in and said, "Lost my dad's Plymouth in a flood. Never got over it. I get it." A woman looked at the mounted engine and said, "I thought I was the only one who kept car parts like they were family photos." After the show, I was invited to present the exhibit at 2 more venues, one in Ohio, another in Illinois. I booked the dates and printed extra flyers. The shop stayed steady. I brought on a part-time assistant from the local trade school. She reminded me of myself at 19, quiet, detail-oriented, unafraid of elbow grease. And the Cobra's build sheets, the ones Mr. Caldwell had handed me months earlier, became the foundation of a small reference library I kept near my desk. Other restorers started asking for access. I scanned the documents and began archiving them in a digital folder, protected and backed up. It wasn't just about one car anymore. It was about what that car had taught me and what it still had to offer others. Patricia stayed mostly in the background after our dinner. She didn't visit uninvited. She didn't try to wedge herself into decisions or comment on my work. But I noticed the effort in her tone during calls with Jack. There was less condescension, fewer digs about how things should be done. At Thanksgiving, we met her at a restaurant. She brought a small wrapped box and handed it to me as we sat down. "I found this in the hallway closet," she said. "Thought you might want it." Inside was a photo I hadn't seen since before we moved into her house, me and Dad standing beside the first Mustang I ever rebuilt. I didn't say much, just nodded and placed it carefully in my purse. She didn't push for more. And maybe that was its own kind of progress. Jack and I spent Christmas quietly that year. No decorations, just good food and a long drive through the country. We didn't talk about everything that had happened, but we didn't avoid it either. One afternoon in January, while sorting invoices at the shop, Jack asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if she hadn't sold it?" "I think about it less now," I said, "not because it didn't matter, but because I've built something that does." He nodded. "Can you forgive her?" "I think forgiveness is a process," I said. "I can acknowledge the apology. I can accept that she's trying. But it doesn't mean the damage is erased. It just means I'm not carrying it anymore." That seemed to make sense to him. And when he asked, "And us, where do we stand?" I looked around the shop at the tools we'd moved together, the calendar we shared, the systems we'd rebuilt after everything had come apart. "We're standing," I said. "That's a start." It started with a message from the museum coordinator in Dayton. They'd seen the exhibit at the Heritage Show and wanted to feature it for their spring program, American Design Through the Decades. They asked if I could expand the display, add more educational material, maybe even give a short talk during the opening weekend. I said yes. That following month, I gathered the materials, photos, documents, audio clips from interviews with other restorers, and drove it all out myself. The engine stayed wrapped in a padded crate during transport. I handled it the same way I would have handled my father's tools, with care, with purpose. When I arrived, 2 staff members met me at the loading dock. They asked questions as they helped set up about the restoration process and how the loss had unfolded. One of them, a younger man with square glasses and oil-stained knuckles, said, "It's rare to see someone turn a mess like that into something people can learn from." I didn't have a clever response. I just nodded and went back to arranging the timeline boards. That evening, I walked the finished exhibit alone before the doors opened to the public. The mounted engine, the disassembled parts I'd saved. A split panel showed photos, one side from before the sale when the Cobra was still whole, the other from the day we picked up the pieces from Roger's shop. There was a section on provenance, a section on legal protections for classic vehicles, and near the end a small display labeled "What Remains." Inside the glass, Dad's watch, the build sheets, the original Shelby emblem from the front grille. Visitors came slowly at first, then in steady waves. Some read in silence, others asked questions or pointed out cars they remembered from their childhoods. A father lifted his son to see the inside of the valve cover and said, "That's what craftsmanship looks like." Later that afternoon, a woman approached me while I was restocking the brochure table. She had a soft voice and wore a silver pendant shaped like a hummingbird. "My husband's brother had a Mustang he rebuilt from scratch," she said. "He passed away before it was finished. I think you would have liked this." She didn't linger, but before she left, she pressed my hand and said, "Thank you for not letting it disappear." That night back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone and pulled up the last voicemail my father had left me. It was from the week before he got too sick to talk for long. "Hey, Mandy, just wanted to say I saw that transmission you posted. Beautiful work. You've got good hands, real good hands. Don't let anybody tell you different. I let it play once, then again." The museum extended the display through the summer. A regional paper wrote a piece on it titled "More Than a Car." Requests followed. By midsummer, the exhibit had traveled to 4 different states. Sometimes I went with it. Sometimes I stayed home and kept the shop running while my assistant handled the deliveries. But no matter where it went, I made sure the display included one section that couldn't be missed: ownership, boundaries, respect. That became the heart of the story. Because it was never just about the Cobra, it was about honoring what someone built and protecting what someone leaves behind. At the shop, things stayed steady. I had enough bookings to keep me busy through the end of the year. The online archive I'd created for factory documentation started gaining traction. Restorers from as far as Oregon and Texas reached out to contribute. I added new entries every weekend, labeled them carefully, created a feedback form so people could report corrections or additions. It turned into something more than I'd pictured. Not just a database, but a shared record of work worth remembering. Jack remained present in the way that mattered. He showed up, he asked questions, he gave space when I needed it. We still didn't talk much about forgiveness in big, sweeping words, but he stayed consistent. One afternoon, after helping me rearrange the tool wall, he picked up the frame bracket from the Cobra's original mount and turned it over slowly in his hands. "I used to think if I ignored something long enough, it would just fix itself," he said. "But I'm learning some things have to be rebuilt one piece at a time." I didn't answer. I just nodded and handed him the next bolt. Patricia remained polite and reserved during the times we saw her. She stopped bringing up the past. She didn't offer excuses. At a birthday lunch for Jack's cousin, she pulled me aside before dessert. "I know there's a lot I can't take back," she said, "but I see what you've done with that shop, with that story. It's not what I expected, but maybe it was never supposed to be." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked back to the table and asked if anyone wanted more coffee. By early fall, the exhibit had a wait list. Schools wanted condensed versions for classroom visits. A collector in North Carolina offered to sponsor a traveling version that could rotate through smaller towns. I accepted with conditions. It would never be commercialized. No ads, no logos, just the story, just the truth. And one final panel added at the end of every version. What would you protect if no one else believed it mattered? On the anniversary of my father's passing, I drove out early to the cemetery, just as the morning fog was lifting off the grass. I brought fresh tulips, his favorite, and a small model of the cobra. Guardsman blue-white racing stripes perfect down to the shape of the grill. I sat by the headstone and placed the car gently next to the flowers. "It didn't end the way we pictured," I said, my voice low, "but I think you'd be proud of where it led." The wind was soft that morning, leaves shifting overhead quiet and steady. The shop was thriving now, not just as a business, but as a place where people brought more than broken machines. They brought stories, heirlooms, pieces of family history they wanted handled with care. Every restoration that came through our doors carried a thread of something bigger. And I worked with the same quiet focus Dad had taught me. Clean hands didn't matter, clean work did. The traveling exhibit had grown into something of its own. A rolling tribute, yes, but also a warning and a reminder about what can be lost when we stop defending what matters, and what can be reclaimed when we learn to stand our ground. Patricia stayed at a distance that felt healthy. She showed up when invited, stayed polite, and left without commentary. She never asked for credit, and she never questioned the choices we made again. Some bridges don't rebuild completely, but sometimes it's enough just to stop the fire from spreading further. Jack and I took longer. We had to relearn trust, not from grand apologies, but through quiet, ordinary consistency. He didn't try to fix things with promises. He just showed up every day, choosing the kind of partnership we should have had from the beginning. We were different people now, maybe a little older in ways that didn't show on our faces. But we'd both decided to try again, not from where we left off, from where it all fell apart. Looking back, the car was never the whole story. It was the entry point, the thing that forced me to stop shrinking myself for the sake of keeping peace. What really changed was this: I learned to speak without apology, to enforce a boundary before it cracked, to protect what was mine, even if the cost of doing so meant walking away from comfort approval or easy explanations. Some things can't be restored, not entirely, but they can be repurposed, they can be honored, and they can be built into something stronger than what came before. If you've ever had to rebuild after something you loved was torn down, I hope you know this. The damage does not define you. What you do with it does. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of something you've walked through or something you've overcome, I'd love to hear your story too. Take care of what matters to you. And if this resonated, I hope you'll stay a while and maybe join me for the next one.